So, hello everyone. I'm Kelly Rotella and I'm with the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, that works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. While we are nonpartisan, the League has collaborated with the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence in the past. We would also like to thank BATV for being here, and we will be linking their footage on our website. And now I'm going to introduce Ellen Gibson. She's with Moms Demand Action.
Hi, my name is Ellen Gibson, and I am the volunteer local group lead for the Kane and Kendall County Moms Demand Action Group. Our group got started about a year ago with 50 members, and then Parkland happened, and we found ourselves with about 600 people in our group within a month. Moms Demand Action, if you're not familiar with the organization, is also a nonpartisan group. We are inclusive of all political parties, all gun ownership status, and welcome all to our movement. We are a grassroots movement of people who seek change in the area of gun violence. Let me just read my notes a little bit here. We do this work every day because 100 Americans die from gun violence and hundreds more are wounded every day. Gun violence is the second leading cause of death for American children and teens overall, and the first leading cause of death for Black children and teens. The daily toll of gun violence in America doesn't always make headlines, but this violence affects everyone, everywhere. It strikes big cities, small towns, and rural communities. And what spurred me to take action on this movement were that I live in St. Charles, and there were two specific incidents. Two girls were shot by their father, who was a domestic abuser, who also shot his mother and then killed himself. That was 6 blocks from my house. And the girls grew up with my daughter. And it was such a tragedy. And to think if there were red flag laws in place, he was clearly a danger. There had been incidents in his past. Those girls could be alive today if responsible legislation had been passed. We also had an incident where another domestic abuser was shooting at his wife on the cross-country path that my daughter ran on an hour before through a neighborhood in St. Charles. So if you think gun violence doesn't affect us out here, it does. And I know in the headlines we know that it affects every part of our country. So Moms believes we can support responsible gun ownership that's very much in line, and legislation that's in line with the Second Amendment, through keeping guns out of the wrong hands and creating a culture of gun safety. One of our initiatives is a program called eSmart that Dr. Schutte will talk a little bit about tonight, but it is the idea that we normalize the conversation around guns, and we ask if guns are locked up when our kids go to play at each other's houses. We ask about peanuts. We feel like we can ask, should be able to ask about whether or not there's a loaded, unlocked gun at a house as well. I've talked enough, but I would like to introduce one of our lead speakers tonight, Kara Koniecznik. Sarah Koniecznik from the Illinois Council Against Coalition Against Handgun Violence. Sarah holds a BA from Northwestern University and an MA from Middlebury Institute of International Studies. She served as a university-level English as a second language instructor at various universities in the Chicago area for 17 years before becoming a volunteer part-time gun violence prevention advocate with Moms Demand Action. I guess that's what I am. And then a full-time professional GVP advocate with the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. The Illinois Council is the founding member of the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition, which has over 170 member organizations from all over Illinois that are collaborating in their efforts to effect meaningful gun safety reforms throughout the state and beyond. As an ICHV organizer, Sarah's role is to educate the public about how they can become active in the gun violence prevention movement and effectively lobby their legislators and other elected officials to support the reduction of gun violence through the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition. And Sarah lives in Vernon Hills with her husband and 2 children. Sarah?
Thank you, Ellen. So, as Ellen said, I am the organizer of the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition, but my employer is the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. The Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence is a 43-year-old policy organization. It is the largest, most effective organization in the country that's working at the state level to pass gun safety legislation. A few years ago, my employer started the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition with the goal of getting activists at the grassroots level behind policy change in Springfield. That was then, and this is now, and a lot has changed in the 6 years since the coalition was founded. What has changed is we've seen an absolute tsunami of interest at the grassroots level in getting engaged on the issue of gun violence prevention. Ellen mentioned the dramatic growth that her chapter of Moms Demand Action saw in the wake of the Parkland shooting about a year ago. I can tell you that we saw similar growth in the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition during that period as well. There's been dramatic growth in the 18 months. It was accelerated with Parkland a year ago, but had already begun 6 months before that when I started working as a professional organizer of the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition. So ILGVP is the coalition, ILGVP. ILGVP consists of 172 member organizations today, and its original mission was to get grassroots support behind state-level gun safety legislation. However, the mission has evolved along with our growth, and today our purpose is to change the culture around guns. Our coalition, which represents over 250,000 people across the state of Illinois, is about balancing the legitimate Second Amendment rights of responsible gun owners with the rights of everyone, including gun owners, to live free of the threat of gun violence. There is middle ground that both gun owners, and in often cases gun dealers and gun manufacturers, can agree on with those of us who want to see stricter laws. We all want one thing. We all want to be sure that guns do not end up in the hands of people who should not have them. So I'd like to just really repeat that because it's very important. What has often happened in our movement is we don't listen to each other. People on the gun rights side don't listen to people on the gun safety side, and people on the gun safety side don't listen to people on the gun rights side. That must change, because we will never get what we all want, which is responsible gun ownership, along with rules and regulations and cultural norms and expectations that ensure guns don't end up in the hands of people who should not have them. We will never get that until we start talking to each other and finding common ground. So if there are any gun owners in the room tonight, I invite you to please talk with me. I'd be happy to give you my card. I routinely follow up with gun owners after events like the one tonight to talk with them about where we can work together to try to make sure that we can balance the rights of gun owners with the rights of everyone to live free of the threat of gun violence. So that is the work of the coalition, and sometimes our work involves advocating on behalf of policy change. Right now, the legislature is in session in Springfield, so there's a great deal of activity around policy. However, when the current session ends in May, between May and roughly November, before they return for veto session, there won't be that much to do on the policy side, so we will be focusing on other things like making sure that we keep our kids safe in school through various policy changes or cultural changes. There may be some people in the room, I've used that term cultural changes a couple of times, and I just want to be sure before I get into my presentation, you understand what I mean by cultural changes. Laws are not enough. We can pass all the gun safety laws we want. It won't keep us safe from gun violence. What's much more important is changing the culture around guns. And what that means is that we are working for a day when it is unacceptable to allow your 3-year-old access to your unsecured firearm. That should be unacceptable, in the same way that it's unacceptable to smoke on an airplane today. I'm old enough to remember when it was okay to smoke on an airplane. Is anyone else in the room old enough? Okay. So we can get that. We didn't outlaw cigarettes, right? And no one's asking to outlaw guns or take guns away from responsible gun owners. What we're looking for is help changing norms, expectations, and changing the definition of what's taboo and what's not. It should be taboo to allow your child, your toddler, access to an unsecured firearm. But I think we can all agree on that, right? And we've all probably thought of that before. But I'd like to invite you to think about something else that you may not have thought of before. It should also be unacceptable for people in fully served communities, privileged communities like mine. I live in Vernon Hills, an affluent suburb in the northern suburbs. It should be unacceptable for people in fully served communities to ignore what's happening in underserved communities. And the reason why is because if someone on the west side of Chicago is not safe from gun violence, then neither are we in our suburban communities. So that's what I mean by cultural change, and that's what we really care about. The policy change is secondary. We want to see laws change, but what we really want to see is cultural change. We want to see the kind of change where people will still be responsible with their guns, whether we have laws in place or not. That's what we want to see. We're looking for partners in that effort. So I'm going to get into my presentation pretty quickly. I'm going to fly really fast because we got a lot of other good people to listen to, but I'm going to give you a quick overview of the corporate gun lobby and the history of the gun violence prevention movement in modern times. Up until 1977, the National Rifle Association was a hobbyist organization. They supported the rights of hunters and taught gun safety. They were very well respected for their work, teaching people to be safe with firearms. In 1977, the board of the NRA stepped down en masse and was deliberately replaced with a new board whose stated intention was to become, from that point forward, a lobbying organization for the corporate gun lobby, so arms manufacturers and ammunition manufacturers. From 1977 until December 2012, their progress toward their goal of normalizing the ownership of guns in America proceeded virtually unimpeded, because to be very honest, people just like me weren't paying attention. I wasn't paying attention. What happened in December of 2012? Does anyone know? Sandy Hook. So a very disturbed young man who should not have had access to a firearm killed 20 first graders in Newtown, Connecticut, and 6 educators. And how many of you have ever heard they were first graders? Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Why hasn't anything changed? Have you heard that? Have you heard people express that frustration? I have too. I can't count how many times I've heard it. And for a long time, I felt the same way. 3.5 years ago, I started the first Moms Demand Action group in the northern suburbs. Today, there are 8 Moms Demand Action local groups in the northern suburbs and over 6,000 members. That shows you the dramatic growth of our movement. And the reason I share that statistic is because that was the norm. That was the norm from December 2012 from 2013 until approximately 2018. Most of us weren't aware of what was going on, but there was a massive swelling of support for our issue at the grassroots level. Moms Demand Action is only the most visible symbol of that. But I can tell you, Moms Demand Action, which is a member of the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition, it is just one of the 172 members of our coalition. These are member organizations, not individuals. So Moms Demand Action is simply the most well-known, but there is an absolute just flood of people every day joining our movement. And this has been going on since 2013. So the next time somebody says they were first graders in Newtown at Sandy Hook, why hasn't anything changed? I'm here to tell you a lot has changed. And that's what the rest of my presentation is going to be about. From 2013 to 2018, the national grassroots movement in support of changing the culture around guns picked up speed in the wake of Sandy Hook. And in February of 2018, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida really kicked everything up many notches, okay? Moms Demand Action alone in Illinois saw an 800% increase between January of 2018 and June of 2018. 800%. My coalition grew at a similar rate during that time. So from February 2018, at that point, everything began to change for policy in Illinois. Up until that point, February of 2018, in the wake of Parkland, the gun violence prevention movement, people who were working for policy change in Springfield, so state laws to reduce gun violence, we couldn't really pass anything for decades. Right? In February of 2018, we passed a bill called gun dealer certification that we had been working to pass for, at that point, 16 years. It finally moved. It didn't move at all for the first 14 years. And when it finally did begin to move in April of 2017, it was only because of grassroots activism. So April of 2017, gun dealer certification passed out of the Illinois Senate. In February of 2018, right after Parkland, it passed out of the Illinois House. 2 weeks later, Governor Rauner announced that he would veto this bill. In a quick description of the bill, the purpose of gun dealer certification is to make sure that all gun dealers in Illinois follow safe and responsible business practices and only sell guns to people who are qualified to have them. Most gun dealers in Illinois do follow those rules and are quite responsible, but it only takes a few bad apple gun dealers to greatly increase the flow of illegal firearms into Illinois communities. And that bill, which took 16 years to pass, was all about stopping those bad apple gun dealers. It, like I said, did pass in February of 2018. 2 weeks later, Governor Rauner vetoed the bill. We immediately turned around, wrote a new version of the bill addressing all of Governor Rauner's concerns. But because of Parkland and because of the 800% or so growth in the grassroots movement on our side of the issue, we not only passed gun dealer certification for the first time in 16 years, we also passed 2 other gun safety bills. One is the 72-hour waiting period. That passed in May of 2018. Before it became law on January 1st of this year, you had to wait 24 hours to legally buy a gun in Illinois. Today, you have to wait 72. This is very important because a lot of people buy guns because they intend to commit suicide or because they intend to hurt someone else. If there's a cooling off period, they're dramatically less likely to harm themselves or others. We also passed in May of 2018 the firearm restraining order, which is a red flag law. The purpose of the bill is if a family member or law enforcement feels that an owner of a firearm is a threat to himself, herself, or others, you can have that gun removed from the person's possession for a period of 6 months. Both of those bills, the 72-hour waiting period and the firearm restraining order, they didn't just pass the Illinois General Assembly, they passed with veto-proof majorities, something that was unheard of even a year before. Again, that's further evidence of the strength of our movement in Illinois and of the coalition. So because Governor Rauner, he had to sign those 2 bills into law. They were going to become law whether he signed them or not because they had passed with veto-proof majorities. He's not a stupid man, so he signed the bills into law, got what political credibility he could from that move, and on the very day that he signed the firearm restraining order into law, he announced that he would veto the new version, the one that had addressed all of his concerns of gun dealer certification. So those of us working for policy change in Illinois, we gambled. We said, well, we're not going to send it to his desk then. If he's going to veto it, then we're not going to send it. And we're going to hope that we get a governor elected who will sign the bill into law. Governor Pritzker was elected in November of 2018, and on the 4th day of his administration, January 17th of this year, he signed gun dealer certification into law for the first time in 16 years. And none of it would have happened if it weren't for people like the Moms Demand Action members in this room right now, okay? The only reason we're making this kind of progress is because of the grassroots activism. And that's what the coalition is about. And also, I need to be sure to mention the League of Women Voters of Illinois, the entire organization across the state, is one of our most active and supportive members in the coalition. So thank you to all of you as well. So I'm gonna move on. That's the history. Now I'd like to tell you, I already mentioned a lot of these bills. SB 337 is the gun dealer certification bill that I just described. It, like I said, passed the Illinois House in February 2018. A few weeks later, the 72-hour waiting period and the firearm restraining order passed in May of 2018. Despite the veto threat by Rauner, gun dealer certification was signed into law January of 2019. As of January 17th, 2019, we had 3 new gun safety laws in place in Illinois that a year before, it was beyond our wildest dreams that we would have seen that kind of legislative success. And there's one other piece that I would like to add. The gun violence prevention movement, not my coalition, but the members of my coalition, the 172 member organizations, played an enormous role in many key counties across Illinois in the electoral successes of politicians across the state who are supportive of gun safety cultural change and gun safety policy change. That's why we have not only a governor now who will sign gun safety legislation into law, but we also have, for the first time in my adult life, I'm 47, we have a majority of Illinois General Assembly members, Illinois House Representatives, and Illinois Senators who will vote in favor of gun safety laws. Again, beyond our wildest dreams just a year ago. And it's all because of you, because of the grassroots activists from League of Women Voters, Moms Demand Action, and the other 170 members of the coalition. Our current initiatives, there are lots of gun safety bills, over 150 gun bills, some coming from the gun rights side, some coming from the gun safety side. Over 150 bills were introduced in the current legislative session, so there are a lot of bills going on or that are under consideration in Springfield right now. The 2 that we're focusing on right now are the SAFE Act and Fix the FOID. And in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on this Fix the FOID bill because it's our urgent priority right now. If there's anyone in the room who would like to follow up with me and learn more about the SAFE Act, I'd love to tell you about it. But right now, I'm going to talk about the Fix the FOID bill. HB 96 is the number, but we're calling it Fix the FOID. If you're like me, words are a little easier to remember than numbers. Jean, would you mind passing these out? Thank you. So the Fix the FOID bill is aimed directly at closing the gaps in the FOID card system that led to the shooting at the Henry Pratt Company in Aurora in February of 2019. What the bill will do, Fix the FOID, what this bill will do when it is signed into law is that it will require in-person application for FOID cards. Today, you don't have to do that in person. You can apply by mail or online. Today, all you have to submit to get a FOID card is a photo. If this bill becomes law, it will require in-person applications for FOID cards and fingerprinting. Fingerprinting is extremely important because it allows us to do things like prevent people like the Aurora shooter from slipping through the cracks. If he had been required to complete fingerprinting when he applied for his FOID card, then that FOID card would have appeared in the system. That application would have appeared in the system. Now, I can get into details. He did submit fingerprints to apply for his concealed carry license, but again, in the interest of time, I want to move on and focus on what the bill will do. In addition to requiring in-person applications for FOID cards, it will also require that the amount of time that a FOID card is eligible, or is valid, will be reduced from 10 years to 5 years. So right now, a FOID card costs $10 for 10 years, $1 a year. If this bill is signed into law, the amount of time that a FOID card will be valid will be reduced to 5 years. There's a really good reason for this. Sometimes people are eligible to get a FOID card when they apply, but 10 years is a long time. They may do something. They may develop a mental illness. They may develop a tendency towards suicide. Things happen to people in a period of 5 years. And so it's a common sense solution to require that people reapply after 5 years for a FOID card. Because if something has happened during that first 5 years that now makes them ineligible to have a FOID card, then we need to know about it. Because it's all in service of the goal we all share. Responsible gun owners and those of us who don't own guns, we want to keep guns out of the hands of people who should not have them. And that is the reason for why we want to lower the period of validity of a FOID card from 10 years to 5. There's a lot more to the bill, but another key piece I want to share with you before I turn it over to Dr. Schutte is when this bill becomes law, it will require, if the person's FOID card is revoked, the Illinois State Police will be required to confiscate that person's firearms. Right now, if a FOID card is revoked, the owner of the firearm, the owner of the revoked FOID card, receives a notice in the mail in which they are asked to please turn in their weapons to law enforcement. That doesn't happen very often. So this bill will require the Illinois State Police to confiscate the weapons of people who should not have guns. So there's more to the bill. Again, I don't want to take up too much more time tonight, but I will be the last one to leave the room if you like. And if anyone would like to talk with me in detail about either Fix the FOID or the SAFE Act, I would love to do that. What you can do right now, what we actually really need you to do, is go to the website, ilgvp.com, which is at the bottom of the front side of the page we just gave you, ilgvp.com. Click on Fix the FOID, and you will be automatically connected by email to both your Illinois House Representative and your Illinois State Senator. We ask that you email and call your House Reps and Illinois State Senators every week, starting now until the bill is voted on, which will most likely happen at the end of May. And please ask your friends and family in Illinois to do the same. So other ways that you can take action in support of gun violence prevention in Illinois, first, support the Fix the FOID. Call your legislators, both House and Senate, every week between now and the end of May and ask them to vote yes for Fix the FOID. We also would love it if you, as an individual or on behalf of your faith or community organization, became a member of the ILGVP Coalition. League of Women Voters Illinois is already a member, but your group, League of Women Voters, I did miss the title. Is it Kane or Central Kane County? If you would like to designate a representative from your group to communicate with me on a weekly basis, I will then share information and make it easy for you to push out calls to action to your members. So if you would like to do that, League of Women Voters of Central Kane County, please let me know. You can also join the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence, my employer, and the coalition in educating as many people as possible throughout the state in the firearm restraining order law. So that bill is law, okay? It will, remember that is the bill that if you believe a firearm owner is a threat to himself, herself, or others, you can have the firearm removed for a period of 6 months. This bill will save lives. It will dramatically cut down the number of suicides, and it will dramatically cut down the number of domestic violence incidents. Think about it. Who's most likely to know if someone is suicidal and likely to commit suicide with a gun? Their family members or the people who live with them. And by the way, you don't have to be a family member. You just have to be a household member to have someone's firearms removed if you feel they are a threat to themselves or others. This bill will save a lot of lives in Illinois, but only if everyday people like you and me know about it. So what we desperately need, we have a grant for this, so it would cost you and your faith or community organization nothing at all. What we need is community organizations willing to partner with us in teaching people about the law, how to use the firearm restraining order, and helping us get the word out about the law and how it will save lives. You can also support neighborhood-based violence interruption programs in all of Illinois' underserved communities. Now, that's the part that the SAFE Act, the other bill that we're prioritizing, that will address that particular issue of gun violence. I haven't talked about that much tonight. Happy to come back at another date and focus on that if you like, or talk to anyone after tonight's presentation. Finally, as I said, take action in support of closing the loopholes in the FOID card system and prevent the next Aurora shooting. Act now on HB 96, fix the FOID. Please email and call your Illinois House and Representatives every week. I would like to ask you to please welcome now Dr. Aaron Schutte, but I'm going to wrap up my presentation, so I'd like to also point out that after Aaron, we're going to hear from Bill Kale about the Do Not Stand Idly By campaign. Dr. Schutte is going to speak about the Be Smart campaign of Moms Demand Action, which is about gun safety. And I just want to make sure everyone gets a chance to write down my contact information. I would love to hear from each and every one of you, especially the gun owners in the room. I would love to hear from each and every one of you if you would like to work together with us to make sure that people who should not have guns don't. Thank you.
That's my grandson.
Thank you very much for having me. As you mentioned, I'm Dr. Aaron Schutte. I'm a pediatrician in St. Charles, and I am the lead for Be Smart of the Kane and Kimball County's chapter of Moms Demand Action.
Dr. Schutte, can you put your microphone up a little bit more? Thank you.
Is that any better? Or I can just be loud, do that.
Go ahead and be loud.
Okay. So firstly, let me just say this is a newly rolled out presentation, so I am going to rely on some notes as I get accustomed to how they've made this new and improved. But as you can see, Be Smart is a program developed by Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America, and it brings together parents and adults to keep kids safe from gun violence. And okay, to start with the numbers. So like Ellen mentioned, firearms are the second leading cause of death for children in America and the leading cause of death for Black children in America. And 1,500 kids are killed every year from guns. And of those, the majority of those are homicides, 53% or 800 kids. After that is suicide, 600 firearm suicides in children in America every year, and 100 unintentional gun deaths. We know that about 4.6 million, 4.6 million children live in a household with a gun, and that is a loaded, unlocked gun. And while we hear a lot about school shootings, mass shootings, that's what makes the news, the reality is that for children under the age of 13, gun homicides most frequently occur in the home. And we also know that for incidents of gunfire that involve a shooter age 17 or younger, 78% of the time that individual obtained the firearm used in the shooting from their home or the home of a friend or relative. And so we recognize that this can be an emotional issue, and there can be people here from all walks of life, some gun owners, some not. Some of us may have had experience with guns, some may have been affected by gun violence. And we believe that most gun owners want to be responsible gun owners. So we're here today to talk about what all of us can do to help make sure that children don't have unauthorized and unsupervised access to guns. So for now, we want to agree on these three things. We all want kids to grow up happy and healthy. Law-abiding citizens do have the right to decide whether they're going to own a gun. And if we can prevent even one death or injury from a firearm, it's our obligation to do so. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the specific stories. There's a lot out there. These are just a few of the headlines, and we know that most incidents don't even make the news. On the upper left, there was an incident in January 2018 last year in Kentucky at Marshall High School. 17 people were shot and 2 people were killed, Bailey Hope and Preston Cope. A 16-year-old shooter obtained access to his father's unlocked weapon, and that is what occurred at the high school. The next tragedy is May of last year. A 4-year-old obtained a weapon and killed his 2-year-old brother Tyson, and the weapon was kept high up in a cabinet. And on the bottom left, there's a headline that references what can happen for young people who live in a community where they feel that carrying a gun might be their best option for staying safe. And so that's a complex matter that we have to consider. And the bottom right, it refers to an incident with a guy named Mikey. He was 13 years old. In January of 2013, he was known to be a happy-go-lucky kid by his family. He came home after school. He accessed his father's loaded, unlocked weapon and shot himself. And nobody expected or thought that this, was anything of a possibility for him. But with easy access to an unsecured weapon, a tragic thing occurred from an impulsive decision. And likely, if he hadn't had access to this weapon, this may not have been the outcome. So it's important to remember that even if you're practicing responsible storage or you don't own a gun, we can't be sure about everyone else. And so the Be Smart model takes the approach that you see here. So the S stands for securing guns, making sure that in the home, all firearms are stored in a responsible manner. And that means that they are locked and that the ammunition is stored separately. There's different ways to go about this. There are cable locks, there are firearm safes, lockbox, and again, storing the ammunition separately is paramount. Unsecured guns also contribute to the staggering number of weapons that are stolen every year. 380,000 guns are stolen every year. A quarter of those are stolen from vehicles. And so it's important to recognize that under the seat of a car or a glove box is not considered responsible storage. And I actually have back on the table an example of a lockbox that fits under the seat of a car. So they're $20 on Amazon, easy to do. M, model responsible behavior, we'll get into that. A is ask about unsecured weapons where kids spend time. R is recognizing the role of firearms in suicide. And the T is telling peers to be smart. So, as you can see here, 13 million households with kids in them have a weapon, and the majority of those kids know where that weapon is, and about a third of them have handled it, and most of them without the knowledge of their parents. So that just brings us back to hiding a gun is not securing a gun. The M is for model responsible behavior. Kids are curious, and the onus is not on them to not want to engage with a gun. The onus is on the adults to keep that gun out of their reach physically by having it locked up. Kids can have complicated emotions, like we mentioned with how some young people feel that it's in their best interest of safety to carry a weapon, depending where they live. They can have that concern. They might be curious. They might be a little intimidated, fearful, all of these emotions. And so it is our responsibility to make sure that we're responsible and not allowing them access to those weapons. It is important to talk to kids as well and let them know that if they see a gun, give them the tools to get out of that situation, not to touch, to leave it, but that is not enough to prevent these tragedies. The A is for ask. So where kids spend time, it's very important to know if there's a firearm in that environment, and if so, how is it stored? So we want to normalize this conversation. If you're not a gun owner, it might not even cross your mind to ask a parent when your child is going over to play somewhere, or it might not cross your mind to ask your relatives. It might not be something you've ever even considered. But it's something that we want to normalize and make sure people are considering and asking. And it doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out, awkward conversation. You can simply say, if you have firearms, how are they stored? And that, if you get the response that you're looking for, a lot of times you'll hear, my husband's a hunter, or I'm a hunter, we have a firearm safe, the kids have no access whatsoever to the combination or the lock, we're very responsible about that. You can probably rest assured that these are responsible gun owners and they know what they're doing. But this is something that is very important to do. And if you're not comfortable, text messaging is great. So I've done this with parents that I didn't know that well and gotten a lot of good feedback. Actually, a lot of parents have said, wow, I didn't even think to ask that. Thanks for making me consider that. So you can just make it part of the normal conversation because like Ellen said, we ask about allergies, we ask, is there a pool there? Who's going to be supervising them? We talk about peanut allergies, we talk about pets, we talk about all these other things. And this is really important to keep on our radar as well. And then the R is for recognizing the role of guns in suicide. So, I've gotten a little out of order here, bear with me. Okay. And that goes back to Mikey's story. So as kids get older, it's also a reminder that if you do own a gun, you might want to reconsider how you are securing it. A simple cable lock may not be adequate. As kids get older and more resourceful, a safe might be a better method. And if you know that a loved one is in distress, the best thing is probably to remove the firearm from the home environment. You can do this by a lot of law enforcement agencies will hold weapons for you during that time. Sometimes gun ranges or gun shops will do that, or you can also put it in the care of a trusted friend or relative, provided that you lock it, and we recommend you don't even provide the key or the combination, just locked for their benefit, but to get it out of that situation. As you can see here, 85% of suicide attempts by firearm are fatal. And that is a much higher rate than all other methods of attempted suicide. And that contributes to the fact that 40% of child suicides are completed with a gun. So this is a survey, and I think we're all aware of what's going on, with mental health in adolescents these days. 17% in this study by the CDC of adolescents in high school said that in the last year they had seriously considered suicide. And in households where firearms were present, teenagers 40% of the time said that they have easy access to guns. And we do have some handout information and more information about suicide and risks, and if you have concerns, some resources that you can access and other things like that. Some of this on this slide as well. And then that brings us to the T, which is tell your peers to be smart. So it's important that we, like I said, normalize this conversation, make it part of something that we're talking about with people, and get this message out to the community. Within our chapter of Moms Demand Action and our Be Smart program, we've done events at community fairs, Elburn Days, we had a 3-day event. We've spoken at city council meetings, the Kendall County Health Department last week. We're working with the Elgin Police Department. We have a lot of buy-in from a lot of the police departments actually, and they're working with us and supplying us with gun locks that we're able to give away. And some of the comments we've gotten is, this is great because we just have the gun locks and we just hand them out, but it would be great to partner and have the information to share with it. That's so important. So we are always looking for new volunteers who are interested in sharing this information as well. So it's part of, the onus is on all of us to tell our peers to be smart. And as was referenced before, this movement is growing as well. Since 2015, when Be Smart first rolled out, we now have 3,000 trained volunteers around the country who have given, at last count, over 2,000 presentations, but I'm sure it's much higher than that just based on what we've done alone, if I'm doing math. So the message is getting out there, but we have to keep getting it out there as this becomes more and more our public awareness. That's the Be Smart acronym to roll it up. And that's the conclusion of what I have to say, and I can take some questions at the end. But now, I would like to introduce Bill Kale with the Do Not Stand Idly By campaign.
Can you hear me now? I take that as a yes. I didn't hear anybody say no. I might not heard what the question was.
Okay, be louder too, Bill.
All right, that's what I need to know. I gotta be a little closer. That's an awesome presentation. I appreciate that very much. I'm new to all this gun advocacy. It's overwhelming to me that we're here now and we still have to ask some of these basic and fundamental questions, and it seems to be so much uphill pushing for things that should be pretty self-evident. I have another group I represent, go right off the menu here. It says there's another program, one that offers a market-based approach for gun safety. It's called Do Not Stand Idly By. This is a Metro Industrial Area Foundation's gun safety campaign, challenging companies that make and sell guns to take action to reduce the carnage. So it's a market-based thing. We're going to actually use the ability of people who purchase guns en masse to ask them to act more responsibly, to develop safe guns and to take control of the gun channels so they don't end up in the hands of criminals. So our goal number one is to reduce gun crimes, injuries, and deaths. And goal number two is to safeguard the ability of law-abiding Americans to own firearms for personal use. So again, like all of the other initiatives that are up here, nobody's attacking gun owners. We're all asking a very simple, basic question. Can we have reasonable, rational gun safety? And why is that so hard to do? I don't know, but it takes everybody to listen and participate and make sure these things come to be. To this end, we think the following changes in the gun industry should be pursued: smarter gun dealer networks and smarter guns and gun locks. I should sit down. I'll give you some detail. Safe guns or smart guns are guns that can only be fired by an authorized user, not by your children or someone who has just taken the gun from you. It doesn't seem to be too much to ask. We don't know why something like that might be considered controversial. More than a decade ago, the ATF data showed half of the guns recovered by police at a crime scene were sold by about 1% of the dealers. We have gun manufacturers evaluated on quality of their dealer networks, and any manufacturer continuing to sell products through bad apple dealers should have a hard time convincing law enforcement that they are worthy suppliers of guns. Like the Pentagon, which has procedures to make sure their suppliers aren't arming the enemy, police need assurances that guns aren't easily making it into the streets and into the hands of criminals. Our strategy: for almost half all guns purchased in America are bought by the military and law enforcement. This is our tax dollars at work. This is a huge market power. Every one of the guns purchased by the public sector is bought for one purpose: safety and security of Americans. But if officials responsible for these purchases aren't thinking about the overall safety practice of gun manufacturers, and most of them are not, then they aren't achieving the full public benefit of those purchases. Metro IAF and our allies are asking executive branch officials at every level of government to change the way they buy guns, to include a full consideration of the manufacturer's commitment to gun safety and responsible gun sales. Our progress: we've assembled a block of public sector gun purchasers that include mayors, attorney generals, governors, county executives, police chiefs, sheriffs, district attorneys. From 123 cities, counties, and states, we've issued a joint RFI, request for information, to major gun manufacturers seeking information on their safety technologies and distribution practices. We've held the first ever gun safety show in 2014, gathering 5 top smart gun developers with local police chiefs, armorers, and officers from 9 departments in the Northeast. Officers were able to see and shoot smart gun models for the first time. And another in January, more than 100 law enforcement officers, investors, and public officials gathered for a firearms safety expo. A firearms safety expo, to see what the future of firearms looks like. Hosted by Common Ground with support from Metro IAF, the expo provided a forum for gun safety innovators to present technology such as biometric locks, user authentication, and theft cracking technology, all of which has the potential to reduce the number of people killed by guns. Do Not Stand Idly By has encouraged institutional investors in the firearm sectors to stay invested and engage the companies and industries as a whole to make meaningful steps to prevent illegal sales, gun thefts, and invest in creating safer products. In a partnership with Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility and with the support of some of the world's largest investors, Do Not Stand Idly By won a resounding shareholder victory at the annual meetings of two top gun manufacturers. Do Not Stand Idly By supported the resolutions that were introduced at Strom & Rugger and American Outdoor Brands Corporation, formerly Smith & Wesson, requiring the companies to issue reports on the deadly impacts of their products and on actions being taken to mitigate those impacts. Despite strident opposition by management in both companies, 70% of the Sturm & Ruger shareholders approved the resolution in May 2018, followed by 53% of the Smith & Wesson shareholders in September. These victories show that the growing determination among investors to promote responsible gun action in the gun industry. Do Not Stand Idly By has persuaded police departments to gather and release data showing manufacturers of the largest numbers of gun crime guns recovered in their jurisdiction. We've published this data and called the leading crime gun manufacturers to strengthen their distribution chains. Do Not Stand Idly By has developed a model authorization dealer policy, ending the practice in cities like Chicago, where the police officers purchase their own duty weapons, of taxpayer dollars being used to subsidize the worst area gun dealers. Those are our main initiatives. If you'd like to know more information about that, just see me after. Thank you.
Are we able to take questions?
Yes. Absolutely, right.
Great.
Moderate.
Go for it.
So, who has questions? Oops, Steve?
Yeah, question to the panel here. Do you have any thoughts about protocols and what's appropriate when it comes to teaching kids about guns? And I'm thinking of parallels you can draw between driving, sex education. I'm thinking about when I was a kid and your scouts, I mean, gun safety was just standard. And I don't think that's the case now. So I'm curious if you guys have had internal discussions and consensus or anything like that about terms on which it's appropriate or reasonable to have kids exposed to what guns are all about and that sort of thing.
Within the Be Smart campaign, we do actually have a handout that addresses this.
Oops, sorry.
Within Be Smart, we do have a handout that addresses this. The focus is really on emphasizing that this is a dangerous, lethal weapon. So we focus on that aspect and emphasizing that kids should not, engage with a gun, play with a gun. If they see one, they should leave. Unfortunately, a very good study was done that showed that children that underwent a 1-week-long gun training intensive program compared to controlled kids who didn't. When they were, both kids in an experimental setting were left in a room, said, hold on, we're just gonna go get your mom. And you can hang out here. There was a artificial, but a gun, a real looking gun in a drawer, and they all engaged with and played with a gun at an equal amount. So it really seemed to not really protect them. So in terms of training, firearm training within scouts or riflery or that kind of thing, I think that's a little separate and that requires specialized instruction. But our message is really for kids, yes, you can tell them that they really should not be touching that, they should leave right away, but the onus falls on the adults to keep them safe. So you can mention it, that's good to do, but it's an adult responsibility to make sure that they're just never in that position.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Adam, and I'm in identity access management. It's computer IT technology, okay? It's basically a gatekeeper, so people can't get into the web enclave and don't have the access rights. We could apply identity and access management technology on a smart chip, use a biometric reader on the trigger, and that could be registered. That smart chip could be registered by the gun dealer so that identity information now is stored on a chip, and the only person that would even be remotely able to shoot the gun would be the person who purchased it with the biometric reader read. Okay? And that's the future. Okay,
That's a great example. I think those are some of the things that Bill was trying to talk about. For instance, you need to match your fingerprint and that type of thing. Bill, are there other examples that you could give us of some of those ways?
There's a little bit of work on that now. There's actually there actually is at least one that's available even on Amazon already. It's a gun lock. It's fingerprint sensitive.
That's not good enough.
Well,
That's not the future.
There aren't, I don't think there's a gun yet out that's commercially available. We do have a project we're working on where we're encouraging people to, say how much they would participate in like a survey if we can get these available. We're trying to work with investors, get enough people with money involved, and we're trying to build market power, assuming the manufacturers will follow the market then if you develop, and to demonstrate that there is actually a lot of interest in having a safe gun. Safe gun and or a safe lock, whichever one you want, gives you both the ability to make it a lot easier to make your gun safe, whereas you don't have to go through with the obvious thing, with your children in the house and lock your ammunition and your gun in separate places and hide them. And then you don't have it readily available. So people want to have it readily available, but then it's not safe. But if you've got a biometric lock, so these things are still in the development. People aren't familiar with them, and it'll take a while for it to roll out. And when you hear, people have got some that like them, then it'll get a bigger deal.
Biometric
It's
lock.
all in the process.
Yeah, that's much, biometric lock is much better than a key mechanism, And that's the step going forward.
Right.
Can I just
Yeah.
comment on that? I think these types of technological solutions, it's wonderful that we're talking about them, and we should be. But I'd just like to point out, in the wake of Sandy Hook, I forget how long, a year or two later, President Obama called for that type of fingerprinting technology so that only the person who owns the gun can fire the gun. The corporate gun lobby responded with such a dramatic and intense effort to fight back against that they completely shut it down. And so I'd just like everyone to keep in mind when you hear solutions like the very good ones that this gentleman has just shared and the very good ones that are part of the Do Not Idly Buy campaign, we do need those. They're wonderful ideas and we should be talking about solutions, but we also have to realize that we need cultural change that will lead to reasons why gun manufacturers and gun dealers have a vested interest in preventing people who shouldn't have guns from getting them. Right now, there is no such vested interest among gun manufacturers and gun dealers. Now, many gun dealers, just because they're good, responsible people, are very interested in solutions like that. But there are an awful lot of gun dealers, and trust me, a lot more gun manufacturers who have no interest in that type of solution because there is no price that they have to pay. For example, gun manufacturers cannot be sued for things like the Sandy Hook massacre. Now, there was a very recent court decision that may change that, but that has been a 6-year effort to try to get any movement on the ability of the survivors of the Sandy Hook shooting to sue the manufacturers of the guns that were used in that massacre based on their marketing practices. It took 6 years to get to the point where the courts will even consider letting them sue those manufacturers. The same thing is true for gun dealers. All of our laws that the corporate gun lobby has worked systematically to put in place since 1977 are all about dismantling, removing any legal means that would make gun dealers want to be responsible. All of the laws that have been put in place in my lifetime have been about relieving gun dealers and gun manufacturers for any sort of responsibility. That has to change before any of these technical solutions will do any good. We have to create a reason for gun manufacturers and gun dealers to want to prevent these types of tragedies. Yeah.
Chris?
Beyond that, how many millions of existing guns are out there? I mean, the technology is great for the future, but I think in terms of other actions, we need more.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thank you for mentioning that. There are literally, this is not hyperbole, there are literally more guns in America than there are people.
They're buried in cornfields all around. They're everywhere.
That's why laws aren't enough. Okay, we're not only about policy change, okay? Yes, laws help, but that's not what we really need. What we need is finding common ground with responsible gun owners. I know that there are millions of gun owners in this country who also, just like me, do not want to see innocent people killed by guns. I know they're out there. And the only way we're going to get to where we want to be is to find common ground, to find things we can agree on. Sometimes that will be policy, sometimes it won't. But I know we can agree on a major cultural change.
The situation in Aurora was such that the man apparently knew he was going to be losing his job. You would think that today human resource programs should be set up to handle the dismissal of a longtime employee. Those situations are very volatile. You're taking away a person's life almost by taking away his job. And he was prepared to take his anger out on everybody he worked with. It seems like human resource programs in business everywhere in the country should be preparing for this kind of thing and be able to handle it in such a way that these people don't feel like they're going to get even after they walk out that door.
Ma'am, I don't disagree with you, and I do think for the most part that's happening, not only in workplaces, but in schools and universities, in any sort of public setting across the country. That is happening, maybe not as much as it should, but it is happening. But I'd like to refer you to the Poway synagogue shooting that took place in California. They had every possible safety measure in place. It didn't stop the shooting. The truth is, we all want to believe that there's something that we can do. We can prepare, we can prevent. The simple truth is, if someone wants to kill someone with a gun, they will. And that's why we have to address the issue at the cultural level. We've done it on so many other things. Smoking, drunk driving, civil rights. That's the only way to get to where we want to go. We are fooling ourselves if we think another lockdown drill is going to protect our children. If we are fooling ourselves if we think putting metal detection scanners in our children's school is going to protect them. That's not enough. I'm sorry, I wish it were. It's
Well,
not.
these
We've been
people
hearing
are
about-
going to find a gun if they are angry enough. Even if he had a boycott, he lost his gun, he's going to get a gun from someone else.
But we could be doing a lot
And there
more
are so
than
many
we are
guns.
now to prevent people from getting guns who shouldn't have them.
We've been hearing a lot about students and schools. We have some students here who are well informed on some of the issues, and I invite some of them to take the floor. Yes.
I have a question. So I'm hearing a lot of like, we don't want people to have to run shouldn't. So I'm wondering, specifically about like assault weapons, so like AR-15s. Is there any scenario in which a civilian should be having an AR-15?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that should be a conversation that we're having as well. Like, yeah, I mean, I guess you can say like, if like there should be responsible gun ownership, but at the same time, are all guns like, even if you're a responsible person, is that a gun that you should be having in your house?
Well, personally, I'm always looking for common sense solutions that can help us find some middle ground. I personally, it doesn't sound like fun to me to shoot an automatic weapon. I can understand, though, that for a lot of people that might seem like a good way to entertain themselves. I'm sure I do some things that other people wouldn't consider very much fun, right? What seems reasonable to me is that why can't people who want to use assault weapons as entertainment, why can't they use them at secured gun ranges and the assault weapon must remain there?
Now, I don't personally see any reason why anyone would need an assault weapon to protect themselves, because there are plenty of other guns that do that just fine. So as long as if you have a non-assault weapon for security purposes in your home, as long as you're keeping it secured in a responsible way, the way Dr. Schutte described, great, go for it. But you don't need an assault weapon to protect yourself, your family, or your property. If you want to use one for fun, great. It lives at the gun range, and that's where you go and use it under controlled circumstances. That seems like a reasonable option to me. Now, I am very interested in talking, if there happen to be any gun owners in the room who like to use assault weapons, honest to goodness, I'd like to hear your opinion. Does that sound reasonable to you or not? And if not, why not? Let's talk about it. That's my opinion. There may be other people who feel differently. Does anyone else want to respond to that question?
Are there other comments from students before we go back to?
Or teachers,
Or teachers?
because we have a variety of teachers here that experienced something recently. And the young lady that just spoke is from IMSA, and wrote just a wonderful, wonderful will, her senior will that I saw published in the newspaper, the IMSA paper. So it's on the minds of the students. And should it be teachers? Scott, what do you think?
Well,
Put it on the spot here.
yeah, no, many of you may have seen a post that I had made in the dreadful What's Happened to Xavier site, the group page. Now, the weird thing to me about the scare that we had at the high school a couple of Mondays ago was that everything was normal. Where the student who was carrying a baseball bag to an early morning workout session was seen by a community member. And the community member made the judgment that it could possibly be a gun case or something like that, and reported to the police station. And I think, if you follow the news, that's a rational observation, right? And the police responded with a militarized response, as you would when you suspect that there's a assault weapon in a building. They cleared the building, they broke up practices, at gunpoint. Kids were traumatized by that. The kids who were in the building at 6:15 a.m. or whatever. And the media reacted with helicopters, and so there's this great big incident, right? And what was weird to me is we started school later that day at 10 o'clock. And in talking to students about it, they were almost apathetic to the whole thing. Meaning like it was kind of an interesting day, but because they had seen these stories in the news, they've seen, this is sort of it's just Monday. Yes, there's a sort of scare in their community, but they're laughing it off. It was just sort of like, yeah, it was just a baseball bat. And what I felt was strange about it was that everybody acted rationally and like this was sort of a normal thing, when really you take 30,000 steps back, and what kind of bizarre world are we living in where you would see a kid walking, or an individual walking into school with a bag, and you jump to the conclusion that might be an assault weapon. And in our culture, I'm glad you brought up, Sarah, that we make these things normal, where the media expects carnage, because it happens. And so I guess to me, my question that I'm kind of ruminating on back here before kind of listening to you ask questions is, what can we do at the national level to deconstruct the mythology, that we have this, because we had the Second Amendment in the Heller case, for example, it's been interpreted where everyone's got a right to a gun as an individual right, regardless of, the fact that we've had in our lifetime, we're about the same age, assault weapons bans, we've had, restrictive gun laws, more restrictive gun laws than we do now. How do we fight this mythology that the gun is a central thing to our liberty? Because there's no sense that would say that's true, but we have to deconstruct that if we're going to make like big national policy changes, I think. And I love the local policy for sure. all politics is local, and it seems like we're on a positive trajectory here in Illinois, particularly maybe with the current governorship, but you know, the handgun violence we've seen in Chicago is due a lot to guns pouring over our state borders. So a national policy is really, you know, one of the major ways we're going to see change. And so how do we deconstruct the culture that, you know, the gun is central to our liberty, you know, which is an 18th century, which again, probably is not even an 18th century ideal. It's you know,
Actually,
something we've kind of invented recently.
For the vast majority of our history, right up until roughly the 1980s, we had very restrictive gun laws throughout the entire country, even way back at the very beginning in the 1700s. So what we are living through is not the norm. And the reason we are experiencing this is because as I said at the beginning of my presentation, starting from 1977 until roughly the Sandy Hook massacre, people of my generation, I'm Generation X, and people older than me, we weren't paying attention and we let our children down. And we have to act now to try to undo that damage. And by damage, what I mean is the corporate gun lobby, and I want to be very clear, when I say corporate gun lobby, I do not mean responsible gun owners. The vast majority of responsible gun owners are not part of the corporate gun lobby. The vast majority of responsible gun owners, they agree with us that we need common sense approaches. However, the corporate gun lobby, as I said, proceeded in its effort to normalize the ownership of guns almost unimpeded for over 30 years. What they were able to do that time, during that period, with lots of money and resources and elected officials, especially at Congress, but at all levels of government, that they purchased during that period by donating to their campaigns, and they purchased their loyalty. What they were able to do with all of those money and resources and power was to create a propaganda campaign, and we've all been used all this time, including responsible gun owners. They've been used, all in the service of increasing profits for firearms manufacturers and ammunitions manufacturers. So the answer to your question, how do we fight back against that, is those of us who see the writing on the wall, finally, either because we were never paying attention to the corporate gun lobby's propaganda campaign, or we were and believed it. What we can do now is educate ourselves, recognize it for what it was, a 30-year campaign to sell as many guns as possible. Recognize it for what it was and speak up and out against it. I am personally active on almost a daily basis on over 100 Facebook groups in Illinois. There's no shortage of places where you can help get the word out to push back against that propaganda campaign. And I encourage you, and when you do it, to think about the comments that you're making so that they are not offensive to gun owners, to responsible gun owners, because they are just as vulnerable as we are to the threat of gun
Well,
violence.
responsible gun owners are not. They don't vote the way you would like them to. They vote for the party that keeps the NRA in charge.
You are probably right in most cases,
You're so worried about
however,
responsible gun owners, huh? When somebody's dead, who cares how responsible they are?
Well, the other thing that you can do, 2020 is coming. March 17th of 2020 is a primary election. Between now and then, you should find out who's running, what their beliefs are, educate yourself on issues that are important to you. Go to League of Women Voters Candidates Forum or see them online and know that your vote is your voice, and take somebody with you to the polls that normally wouldn't vote after they have been educated.
Well, here in Illinois, we do pretty good, but not out in the red states.
Okay,
They're guiding,
I'm sorry.
they're guiding with their life.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Margie?
My question you almost answered, and my comment in the form of a question would be, do we not only have to look at gun laws, but to the breakdown of mental health in America?
Yes,
we have to do that in combination. And then I was wondering, are these legislators more influenced by corporate or by the Second Amendment, the ones that will strongly
And those are
oppose?
questions that you ask them.
I'm going to hand the microphone to someone else because I've done a lot of talking, but I just to the first part of what you said, I agree with you completely about the need for attention to the lack of appropriate mental health care. I just want, it's a common misperception that people who are mentally ill are more likely to commit gun violence. The truth is, they are vastly more likely to be victims of gun violence rather than perpetrators. So I
Well,
just.
the young man,
Does anyone else like to respond to the second part of her question or the first one?
Well, I would say in response to the first part as well, there is a mental health crisis, but the mental health problems and rates in the United States do not differ from Western European nations and other nations in the world, and yet our gun violence rates are vastly different. So yes, there is a crisis, but that's not the only issue.
Thank you. My concern is that they use the mental health issue as an excuse for not addressing other underlying, I mean, what's our problem? And we can't solve it overnight. What's the plan? How are we going to get to where I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
We understand. Yes, we do.
I can tell you more.
I just wanted to say, our group got started a year ago, and in my wildest dreams, I would have never have thought that Lauren Underwood would have won her election out here. We, as a group, campaigned heavily for candidates who filled out the Moms Demand Action Gun Sense candidate survey and aligned with the principles outlined in our organization. We were able to mobilize people to knock on doors. I talked to so many people, everyone in our group. We were all over the place, and we are resting right now a little bit, but we are planning, to hit the ground hard again in 2020. And we would love all your help because, it seems to me that it's a little bit like a microcosm of what happened in Illinois. I feel like the same kind of thing is happening now. We're starting to see really good federal legislation, and it's going to stop in Senate. And then if it doesn't stop in the Senate, it's going to stop at the executive branch. We need to replace them all. If they don't vote our way on these issues, and this isn't a matter of being a Republican or a Democrat, Republicans can vote for gun safety too. This isn't, I never thought I'd be a one-issue voter.
Sometimes they do.
They do. I was surprised at some rep visits when I was down in Springfield a couple months ago. I was surprised at what some of the Republican reps told me, and in a very good way. Things are changing, but they need to hear from us. They need to hear from all of us, and they need to hear from everybody that we expect change, that it can't keep going this way. The drills my kids go through, the fact that my daughter's been going through these drills since she was 6 years old. She was in kindergarten when Sandy Hook happened. It doesn't make any sense. I think we all know that. It doesn't make sense that we're changing the whole culture for our children because we're afraid, to make cultural change on this issue.
Terry.
Just briefly, we live in a market-driven economy, and our culture is driven by Hollywood. And to speak to the teacher's comment over here, Scott, I think your name is, since 1977, the incidence of violence in movies and TV has skyrocketed. We now can see torture, movie, rape, everything right on the movie screen. So don't buy it. They will make the movies that you buy, and if you keep sending your kids to those movies, they will keep making them. And what are we teaching our children? I was a little kid in the 1950s, and we never saw this junk in the movie screen or on TV. So don't buy those movies, and don't teach your kids to go see them, and teach them what is right. As a mental health counselor, I counsel kids who say, "Oh my God, I'm so anxious." I say, "Well, what movies are you watching?" Slasher movies. Halloween is my favorite movie. My parents always showed me Halloween 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Well, guess what? You dream about that when you're a little kid, and then it gets worse and worse. And the other thing is, go see the movie The Public. It's in movie theaters now. It's about, it could turn into, it's a very good movie about the public library who provide most of the social work counseling now for people in homeless people in the United States. It's a really good movie. So anyway, that's it.
Can I just really quickly, I agree with you, okay, especially what you said about if kids have a lot of anxiety, we should probably counsel them not to watch horror movies. I couldn't agree more. But I just want, very often that argument kind of obscures an important fact about our issue, and I just want to clarify. In every developed nation, they have a culture that glorifies that type of violence in their media. I'd like to give you an example. Violent video games are actually a national obsession in Japan, and there are literally, I'm not exaggerating, 0 gun deaths a year in Japan. So it's very often that is put up as a reason for our gun violence problem. I'm not saying it's not harmful, I agree with you completely, but we have a gun violence problem not because of the violence in our culture, but because it is too easy for people who shouldn't have guns to get them in America. That's not true in any other developed nation, and we have a rate of gun violence 25 times higher than all other developed nations. It's not because of our culture, it's not because Americans are more violent, it's because we have turned deaths by gun into a marketable commodity. We've allowed the corporate gun lobby to do that, and every one of us, even responsible gun owners, have a very strong vested interest in turning that around. Thank you.
Okay, first the gentleman there, and then you, and then you will be next. Okay, sir.
Yeah, so a quick comment and then a question for the panel. I'm a first-generation millennial, born in '84. Columbine happened when I was a freshman in high school, so showed up the next day to school with police and dogs everywhere. I was at NIU. When NIU happened, my friend was shot in the back. And I was at Aurora University just a couple weeks ago teaching a class when my social work students then had to call off a class to go work with first responders. And it hits us in our entire lives and permeates throughout. I also love violent video games. I play Call of Duty. I played Call of Duty my entire life. I was on the NIU Counter-Strike team. Counter-Strike is an incredibly violent, bloody video game that goes over the top. The day after the shooting, I consoled with my friends by playing violent video games. So I just want to push back a little bit on the narrative of media is what causes trouble. Humans make decisions, humans make those interactions. If we have the right support structures and the right culture that we're talking about, we can play all the violent video games we want and we won't turn to violence if we have culture. But the folks that I hung out with, a lot of them are now gun owners, and a lot of them are what we would call gun nuts. They're the shall not infringe type when we're talking about the Second Amendment. They own AR-15s, they love customizing their AR-15s, they love shooting their AR-15s. What are your various organizations doing to reach out to them? What is the persuasion maneuver? They're the ones who need to lock their guns up. They're the ones who need to understand that gun dealers have a role to play in this. They're the ones who need to understand that safe guns make America better. Not me, not us. So what are we doing to persuade?
From the Be Smart perspective, we do this preaching to the choir like tonight, but we also go out to the community and we address parents of all stripes, and so we are available to go to any PTO meeting, any mommy and me group, any community organization whatsoever. This is a nonpartisan, non-political message that we are trying to spread far and wide. So we are trying to get a wide reach in terms of the Be Smart message and the safety message.
Last Wednesday night, I met with 2 private gun dealers in Libertyville. I and one of my coworkers, a former ATF agent, we had arranged to sit down with them and talk about this issue and the different ways that we see it. It was one of the most rewarding educational evenings of my life. I learned so much from talking to these very responsible gun dealers. They helped me understand how gun dealers, gun owners, people that you may be thinking of, how they hear what we talk about, right? And it was incredibly helpful for me. I was really grateful to them for spending that time with me because it helps me understand. Sometimes I talk about this issue and I don't realize that they're perceiving what I'm saying in a way very different from what I intended. And through having that conversation with the gun dealers last week, I realized the same thing happens on their side, right? Like their side says things and they don't understand how I'm perceiving it. One example that came up during our conversation was they talked so much, it was extremely important to them that we
like, we talked about how we've managed to create rules around how we use cars, which can be fatal, right? If a car can kill someone, right? So, but we've managed to make cars dramatically safer in my lifetime by instituting rules and cultural change. Now we all wear seatbelts. It's almost unthinking now. When I was born, that was not the case. Kids are in car seats now. They weren't when I was born. People held, my parents held me in the front seat. I'm sure that happened to many of you. So we've been able to dramatically decrease the number of deaths by vehicle. So why can't we do that by guns? So I'm having this conversation with these gun dealers last week, and they said, what the reason that doesn't work on us is because you're comparing a privilege, driving, with a right, gun ownership. And I quite authentically, I said, I really meant this. I said, I understand that you see it that way, and I agree that gun ownership is a right. It's a right. It's in the Constitution. I revere the Constitution like almost all Americans are raised to do. I said, but when I hear that on my side of the issue, when I hear that argument, you can't compare driving and gun ownership because gun ownership is a right and driving is not. That doesn't make any sense to me because my child, I've lost count how many times he's come home from school and told me, he has got a stomach ache. Well, why? I asked him what went on that day. He had a lockdown drill that day. He doesn't even know, he's not even aware of the level of anxiety that the easy access of guns that we've allowed to happen in our society, he's not even aware of the extent to which it's affecting him. I said, that's the world we've created for our children. Let's work together to lower the incidence of gun violence. So we're not 25 times more gun violence than all other developed nations. Let's work together to lower that number to 10 times more, or 13 times more. Let's cut that number in half. And then we can elevate the importance of the right versus privilege argument. But we are in a state of crisis in our country, and now that argument doesn't mean very much to me right now. Let's work together to lower, let's roll back this crisis, and then let's talk again about your argument about how gun ownership is a right and driving is a privilege. Then I will work with you to elevate it. But I need you to work with me to get to a point where we can have that conversation.
So, okay, we have 2 more questions that we're going to accept, and then we need to wrap it up. But I'm happy to say that our speakers will stick around. So, yes.
My question is just, which I thought I might be addressed, and it's all the gun violence in Chicago and the gangs, and how are they getting them, and how do you stop that? Can you stop that? How are they getting them going?
In 1 minute.
Sure. Okay. So the second bill that I did not talk about tonight, the SAFE Act, is aimed directly at ending everyday gun violence in underserved communities, which is the respectful way to talk about gang-related gun violence. I am here to tell you that up until 2.5 years ago, I had never stepped foot in the community of Austin on the west side of Chicago. I, at that point, had lived in Chicago for almost 30 years. 2.5 years ago, I found out about one of the violence interruption programs that's operating on a completely new model. In the past, violence interruption programs in underserved communities on the south and west side of Chicago, and by the way, there are many underserved communities in many other parts of Illinois. It's not just Chicago. In the old model, organizations that are working for peace in those underserved communities, they would do only one thing. They would hire formerly gang-affiliated individuals, often formerly incarcerated, to intervene and stop retaliatory violence in these communities. Today, we have a completely new model. It's based on a way of integrating and building community in those parts, those underserved communities that are dealing with gang violence. They do things like provide cognitive behavioral therapy. They provide access to jobs. They provide access to things like helping people get a driver's license, helping people get a suit so they can go to a job interview. The key, though, is once someone enters their program, they never, ever give up on that person. It doesn't matter how many times that person makes progress, then falls, takes 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, it doesn't matter. And the other thing is, instead of working in isolation, they're teaming up with other organizations in their communities to create a sense of community. They do things like take back blocks. So every Thursday and Friday night in the summer in Austin, they host, along with many other community organizations, they host basically public parties on the square. And by getting out and taking over those blocks, they're reclaiming the public space so that people can start to feel confident enough, secure enough to actually come out of their homes and get to know one another. So the short answer to your question is there are organizations that are incredibly effective, and they're mushrooming right now. They're popping up new organizations all the time, and they're all based on building community. And that's what wasn't done in the past. I'm sorry?
Where are they getting all the guns?
They're all illegal.
40% of all illegally trafficked firearms in Illinois originate from Illinois gun dealers, which is why we needed the gun dealer certification law, which is not yet being enforced because it's currently in Rules Committee with the Illinois State Police. It will soon be released, and there will be a period of public comment when you can comment on how the ISP has decided to enforce gun dealer certification. But once that law is being enforced, we will see the 40% of illegally trafficked firearms originating from Illinois gun dealers. That number will decline dramatically. The remaining 60% come from other states, and until we have change at the congressional level, we will not see any solutions that will stop guns coming into Illinois from Indiana or Wisconsin. And that's why it's so important to support congressional level candidates who will vote in favor of gun safety. There was another question.
Okay, well, one final question from, yes, you.
First of all, I just wanted to say to the League of Women Voters, I am incredibly grateful that you availed this opportunity. I learned a ton tonight. My stomach is churning, my head is spinning, and I really can appreciate when we talk about possibility, and when the guy was talking about, technology, it's so far above my head, I don't even understand it, and yet I appreciate it. What I really would like, though, I didn't know about Moms Demand Action. I'm so grateful for you. I didn't know about Be Smart. I'm so grateful to know that. And what I think what really would matter for me is there a way that the League of Women Voters can let me know, here are things to do. Like, I want to leave here as an individual and as a collective in actually creating some kind of change that I'm capable of creating, which is not going to be...
You can start by going to www.ilgvp.com, clicking Fix the Void, and email your Illinois House Senator.
I have that, and I'm certain there are other things. Could there be some kind of a list?
If the League of Women Voters of Central Kane County wants to designate one member to be my contact person, what we do is every Friday at 11 a.m. we have a coalition call. It lasts for about 1 hour, and we share information, educate each other about gun violence prevention in Illinois, and we always share a policy update along with lots of ways that you can get involved. Most people are not able to actually be on the call because they have jobs and lives and responsibilities. So every Sunday evening, we send out coalition call notes. And in red, I put all of the action items. The idea is your designated representative from the Women Voters Central Kane County who communicates with me weekly. You will simply copy and paste what I put in red into a message to your membership, League of Women Voters membership. You send it out, ask them to take action, like email your House representatives on Fix the Void. That's one example. But there are always in every week's notes 4 or 5 different things that you can do. I'm sure Ellen has something to share about Moms Demand Action as well. You're also all, we'd love to have you join our Facebook page as well, where you can stay on top of ways to take action.
And there is a Kane and Kendall County Moms Demand Action closed Facebook page you can join, and we have a sign-up sheet here too. If you want to join our organization, you'll get text message calls to action, similar, I'm sure, to what the council is doing. But you can have actions, every week. There is stuff you can do, and it can really make a difference.
And we meet on a monthly basis, so it's once a month on Sundays, and there's always, you never leave without a slip of paper on things you can do.
The primary difference, though, if anybody's confused, between Moms Demand Action and the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition is Moms Demand Action, not always, but often is focused at the national or state level. At the coalition, we are focused on all levels of government and cultural change. So it's just a broader way to get involved. However, Moms Demand Action is an amazing organization and the great group of people. So that's a great alternative too.
And I also invite you to join the League of Women Voters and represent us on the Friday call.
See?
So thank you very